Hey guys, I'm in my garden today doing the very necessary task of thinning my carrots. If you've ever grown carrots and you've harvested really thin, small carrots, definitely not the size you were hoping for, then this is a task that you do not want to skip. I'm going to show you how to do it, and I'm going to give you some other tips to help you grow great carrots, whether you grow in the spring or in the fall. First things first though, before we even talk about thinning, we want to make sure that you get your carrots to that point. So let's talk about a few things that are really important in getting your carrots started. First of all, let's talk about the soil. Carrots are going to be growing deep into the soil, so they need loose soil. That's why I love to use raised beds for this purpose, because I can amend my beds with very loose compost. I've found that has yielded me the biggest carrots altogether, compared to planting in my ground bed, which tends to be heavier clay. And if you have a soil that is either clay or rocky, then a raised bed might actually be a better fit for you. You want to make sure that whatever medium you choose to plant in, that to a depth of about 6 to 12 inches, it's very loose and very rock free for the best type of carrots. Next, and this one does not get mentioned enough, but it's something I have seen firsthand in my garden, and that is to select a sunny location. I know carrots love to grow in the cool seasons, and that's usually the spring and in the fall, but they do require sun. And what I've noticed in side-by-side tests, both here in my garden and in another raised bed, which I did a video comparing the two last year, side-by-side test, I've noticed that the carrots that are planted in full sun, especially in the fall, yield a much better result. So when you're choosing where to plant carrots, don't let the fact that they're cool season crops fool you into thinking that they like shade, because they absolutely do not. Plant them in a sunny location to get the biggest, best roots. The next thing you want to do is make sure your seeds even germinate in the first place. This is a big challenge that a lot of new carrot growers face, and it's one that I faced too. But here is a method that I have found is virtually fail-safe when it comes to planting carrot seeds. Number one, make sure that the soil that you plant in is moist. You want those seeds to have moist soil contact so that they have the best shot at germinating. Now in the spring, that's not going to be so hard if you get regular spring rains, but in the fall that can be a little bit more challenging. Number one, because you may not be getting a lot of rain in the fall. Number two, the temperatures are a lot hotter, and so the evaporation is going to be more intense in the fall, which means your soil is going to dry out quicker. So either way, my method is at planting, first I want to make sure the soil is moist, and then second, I cover my planting after I have sown the seeds with a flat floating row cover. Some people use burlap, some people use cardboard boxes. I like using a flat floating row cover because what it does is not only does it capture the moisture and prevents a lot of evaporation, it also allows the rainfall or the irrigation that you have coming overhead to penetrate. And so that way your soil is continuing to get moisture from the rain. And then it lets light in. And to me, that is key, because sometimes carrot seeds germinate at different rates. And so if you have light that's coming in, then you can keep that row cover on top until almost all of your seeds have germinated. And that'll make sure that the early germinating seeds have access to light they need right away. So I cover mine with floating row cover, and then I continue to water on top of the row cover. And in the heat of the summer for a fall crop, a lot of times that means watering every single day. The good news is for a fall planting, carrots are less likely to need as much time to germinate. This year, my carrot seeds germinated in about 7 days, as opposed to 2 to 3 weeks that it often takes in the spring. Now that we've got the carrot seeds germinating, we need to watch those seedlings carefully, because the next step, like I said at the beginning, is critical, and that is to thin your seedlings. I like to wait until my seedlings show at least a set of true leaves, not the little sprouts. That way I know which ones have the best shot of growing well into a good sized carrot. Once they show those true leaves, then I start going out and thinning. And I like to have about 1 inch between each of the sprouts. 1 inch minimum, sometimes 2 inches. Now, if I have a really thick stand of carrots, then I may do this in batches, in waves. I may come out here once and thin to about an inch apart or maybe a ½ inch apart, just to make sure that the ones that I'm leaving will be able to be strong enough to be able to make it. Because if you go in and you thin them all at once, sometimes you've got some that just don't end up growing, or they may have had their roots disturbed by the thinning process, and then you'll have empty gaps and you won't have as much as you want. And so if you have a real thick stand of carrots, then I would do this in a couple of waves. But ultimately, you want about 1 to 2 inches between each carrot. What will happen if you don't is that they will not grow as thick. They will not grow as long. I've done this on a side-by-side test. I've seen this in carrot plantings where maybe I haven't thinned as well, or I missed 1 or 2, and I've been able to tell a difference. The ones that are planted too close together grow smaller, and they don't grow as thick, and they don't grow as deep. All right, so now that I've talked to you about the importance of thinning, let's go and thin my carrots. So if we're looking at this stand of carrots right here, this actually isn't all that bad, but we still have some carrots that are really close together. Let me move these pine needles out of the way, and you can see them a little bit better. So let's look at this set right here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like a bunch of carrots right there close together. And really for this space, there needs to be just 1. So these actually have quite a few true leaves, and probably could have done this a little bit earlier, but this is still fine. I'm going to snip them at the root level. And the reason that I'm doing this is because I don't really want to disturb whichever carrot gets to stay. I want those root systems to stay intact and not be disturbed. This is really important for carrots. So looking here, I think I'm gonna let that bigger one stay. So I'm just gonna take all of these out. And of course, you can use these carrot thinnings that you get. You can use them in salads if you want to. So here I have between these two, I have like 1 to 2 inches between those two. That's perfect. Now let's look over here, and I've got 3 right in a row here. And I think I'm gonna leave that one. And here's where it's tough. I've got right around an inch between those two. I would have to make a judgment and call on this. If I leave them both, they're both going to be a little bit smaller. Or I can take this one out, and then I have too much room between those two. Now, I could try to transplant them. I've not found that to work very well. And what I've found too is sometimes it disturbs the remaining one. So I would prefer not to try to transplant, because I've never found a carrot of this size actually taking to a transplant well. So I'm gonna go ahead and snip that one. Now I know this seems like there's a lot of room between those two, and ideally I would have liked there to be one here, there just wasn't. But what I'll find as they grow is these two are gonna have plenty of room, and they will develop really strong roots that I will be much happier to have compared to a bunch of small rooted carrots that I really have a hard time using. So while I'm doing this next section here, I wanted to give you a couple of other quick tips to growing carrots that I've found. And number one is that I would definitely pay attention to the varieties that you buy, whether they are going to be better for spring planting or fall planting. Some of the ones that I've grown, like New Carota or Danvers, they're actually good for both. But I know earlier this spring I planted a carrot seed that I didn't realize was actually better suited for the fall, and it bolted really quickly, which means it sent up a flower stalk and it didn't develop a root and it wasn't edible. So I would really watch that. There are some descriptions in soil catalogs that talk about them being a good keeper or good for fall harvest, and just keep up with that. Some, like I said, will double duty, but just watch on the varieties. Also, you might want to plant a couple of different varieties. I have 4 different varieties that I'm planting here in my fall garden, and so I'll be testing to see how they do in the fall. New Carota and Napoli did really well in the spring. What I'm noticing here is that I don't have good germination at all on the Napoli, or Napoli, however you say that, for my fall garden. But it was wonderful in the spring. So I'm thinking maybe the seeds just didn't like to germinate in the heat. And if all I had planted was that one, then I may have just thought it was a bad variety, but it wasn't. So test different varieties. Don't be afraid to just test some of the basic ones before you get fancy and go with some of the other colored, like the rainbow carrots and things like that. Those are fun, but I would recommend that you would go ahead and get an idea of what you're doing, make sure that you're confident in growing carrots, and then once you get a couple of seasons, or maybe just one where you figured it out, then you can start branching out to some fun new kinds. But choose a staple variety, one or two, some that might be good for your region, and I think you'll have a better success rate when you do that. I know for me, growing carrots is one of the most rewarding and productive things I can do in my garden, and even in a very small space. I plant in the spring and in the fall, and we have enough to last our family all year where I don't have to buy carrots at the grocery store. And so this is a crop that I would definitely recommend that you plant in your garden, and thinning them is going to make you have a better harvest altogether. Now, if you're interested in more tips on how to grow carrots successfully, you might be interested in this podcast episode called Carrots, What Can Go Wrong, for a more thorough discussion on how to avoid common mistakes in growing carrots so that you can have a great harvest yourself. For more gardening videos like this with tips to help you grow your own food, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.